Oh, might be able to sneak it in.
Sneaky wiki. Sneaky bitch.
Then mere models here for 12. The life changes. Yeah, that'll do. Alright, I can go in the corner like that. Check.
Check.
Can you speak in yours?
Check.
Check. Hey, Karen speaking here. And you again?
Check.
Okay.
Check.
I might have to dive under the table and...
Check. Is that coming through?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It is coming through?
Your audio?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's turned off.
Speak now.
Speak.
No. It was before.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So it's not coming through now?
No. But now it should be. Check.
Check. Okay, cool. So you meant it was like coming through regardless?
No.
Okay, cool.
When you had it turned on, it was. Cool. All right, that's there. I've done the posting. I don't think there's much. I mean, it's good to just check that we're actually live and see.
Are we actually live now?
Yeah, we should be. Mere Models podcast. It says we're live.
It says we're live.
Yeah, cool.
But see, there's no like background noise now.
We're actually live.
Oh, a little bit.
That's the general. Yeah, we should. Yeah, you can.
Yeah. Oh, it's not as bad as last time.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm just.
Who knows? Hola, Patricia. ¿Cómo estás? Is that stuff in the way there? That box? Kind of.
Damn. Squishmallow. So was it worth buying a V-friend to get a Squishmallow?
Yes. Well, no, not just for that. If it was just for that, no. But other reasons, yes. Cool. All right. Let me just get my notes up and then we'll kick it off.
Have you got any notes?
Yeah, I got a bunch.
Yeah.
Have you got any?
Have I got any? What do you think?
No.
What do we think, folks? Would Juan have notes for this?
He probably has a couple. Oh, shit. It's got tons. All right, this could be a big episode. Damn. All right, here we go.
Got plenty of notes, folks.
I will just need to perhaps ask you a question at the start. No, whatever. Check. You need to speak again?
Check.
And just say something normal.
Hola, ¿cómo estás? Tu parles un petit français?
Turn yours down a bit.
Kudasai des. Sensei des. Yashi. What's a yashi again?
No
I think
idea what it is.
kudasai is nice or cool.
I have no idea, mate. No.
I'm telling you what, I'm struggling with Japanese way more than I am with any other language.
Good. Mortals, welcome Mere Mortal Lights to another episode of the Mere Mortals Musings. This is where your two favourite Mere Mortals, Kyron
and Juan,
here on the 20th of September, get together, do a live episode. So if you ever do feel like joining us, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, and we pick a particular topic, effective philosophy, deep conversations with a lighthearted touch, although today's going to be actually a rather heavy one. And yeah, I think I'll just get into it with, I chose today's topic. It was end-of-life changes. And there's been a few recent events that have all somewhat combined for me to make this a pertinent topic. And one of the big catalyst ones was this podcast I listened to, America Plus, Cole McCormick, boosts in all the time. Thank you very much, Cole. He was talking about how his father got stage 4 cancer, which is, pretty heavy stuff. That's anyone getting to that stage 4 stage is obviously they're pretty ill, and touch and go as to what will happen to them. And it got me thinking not only about, I suppose, the person suffering from the illness, but those around them as well, and coming into, I guess, like broaching the topic of mortality, but without death being the central focus of it. So just end of life changes was my main one here. And yeah, I'll start off with, I suppose, something that has happened to myself, my family recently, which was, I never talked about this on the podcast. So this is the first one. Mum was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's about 7 years ago. Yeah. And posterior cortical atrophy, to be exact, which basically means like there's deterioration at the back of the brain and it moves its way forward.
Which you were saying that there was two basically when you explained to me a long time ago. It's kind of like there's a back to front and front to back.
Yeah. And so the back to front generally means you lose control of coordination, motor skills, have the difficulty deciphering between objects and where one ends and where the other starts, boundary points between things. You can have a drawer full of forks and then a bright colorful spoon in the middle of it, and you'll still kind of struggle to see that.
Right.
It's imagine if you're like just squinting really heavily, or if, I don't know, you're on psychedelics or something, and
it's like spatial issues, I guess.
Yeah, spatial issues. But you'll retain the memories / recognition of people. So, which has been good in a sense because Mum's still been able to recognize us for all these years. So, which is, it's terrible to have, your own mum or family member and them not be able to recognize you. And yeah, like over the past 7 years, she's kind of, it's been a slow deterioration. Once kind of seen some of this, meeting her, we've been able to live still pretty well. She lives with my dad. They've got some kind of like carer helpers who live / help out a lot of the time. The Australian system of NDIS is really good, and my dad's just in a good position to be able to help care after her. Myself and my brother also live very close by, so we help out a lot. But yeah, recently she's had kind of just some rapid deteriorations of health, which is obviously distressing for me, or distressing for her, 'cause she gets very anxious and having sort of like psychotic attacks, and then just the whole general needing a lot more care and not being able to go out and do a lot of things that my mum and dad used to. And so I suppose I wanted to start off with you here. I never really got the chance to know what she would have thought the end of her life would be like. By the time I was mature enough, because, it was such a long time ago, and
you were 23, 24.
Yeah, I was pretty young, my brother even younger, and there's just a whole bunch of things I wish I'd kind of been more mature enough to be able to ask her to delve more into like her past, her memories. Nowadays it's too late to be able to go there. And I was imagining, like, what did she think of herself in her later years? What did she imagine they would be like? And then also, death awaits us all, but it's kind of really hard to imagine these things, I think, until you're close to it. So just for you, do you have pictures of like what the end of your life would be like potentially, or it's just too far away, it's too vague, it's too hard to...
I think the greatest challenge when it comes to anything like this is that for anybody to really conceptualize what that end period looks like, it feels so far away unless you have a diagnosis which then presents it very clearly to you. So if you have a cancer diagnosis, Alzheimer's, name here, whatever might kill you the next 10 years, you at least have a position in time where, okay, I see the finality, I see the mortal end to me, and so you can kind of start thinking through what will that look like for the last year, last month. Maybe it might not be an exact date, but you'll know, okay, I'm not now towards maybe higher probability that I'm going to pass away the next year. So without that, it becomes really, really difficult, I think. Much more so when you're younger. But even now, if you really had to, tell me right now, hey, can you think through what it might look like, towards the end of your life? It's very hard. There are some physical aspects of it that I think...
Just imagining one's like thinking like, I'm going to be deadlifting these fucking huge
I'll be deadlifting 5 plates and die. Yeah, I want to have a heart attack at the gym and die. But the only reason I can probably even just articulate this one is because I have heard it in various forms or read about it. Specifically, Peter Attia talks about this around how fit do you want to be or how healthy do you want to be in the last decade of your life. And you'll never really know what the last decade of your life is, but you can have a good assessment of what you might want to aim for. And then to be able to have a really healthy body from as much of a physical perspective. I have thought about that and gone, okay, well, I've talked about it before in the podcast, hey, can you live to 150 in that sort of style? But look, realistically for me, it would be, I don't know, if it looks like 80, 90, 100, it's being at least able to carry myself in most day-to-day life. Exactly. So mobile, flexibility, all of those sort of things. I could see that. That would be something that I wish upon at the very end days as well, to be able to be mobile. That would be awesome. From it gets really difficult, I think, in the, like when you think accomplishments or things that you want to be achieving or striving for. Yeah, I haven't put enough thought into it to go, I think I can articulate it well right now. Do you think you've thought about it through, had any thought beforehand, thought that it's helpful to even do it right now?
Yeah, not particularly, because it does feel like it is so far away. And just, my mum, for example, the year before she was diagnosed, there was some warning signs, and that was like, let's go to the doctor and just see what's happening sort of deal. And it takes a long time to kind of get a diagnosis. But I don't imagine that she would have had, the next potentially, because the expected life expectancy is usually about 9 years, I think, from diagnosis, 8 to 9 years, something like that. I don't imagine that she was expecting like, 8 or 9 years time, I'm going to pass away. She's very, she's quite young, in her early 60s. So that sort of thing, it kind of makes me go, it's too far away, especially like end of life. I don't even, I need to kind of like get a family first. That sort of, that's.
There's other things that are priority first and foremost.
Yeah, correct. So I haven't, no. For me, no. And I actually have a little bit of a difference when it comes to the physical stuff as well, compared to you, but we'll get onto that later. But yeah, I was just thinking like, just for her, there's been as much changes for her, to be honest, as there has been for myself and my brother and my dad. A lot would have remained the same. I still would have quit my work. I still would have traveled Latin America. But certainly a lot of decisions with regards to where to live, how much time I spend with my family, the way I interact with her and my dad and my brother, a lot of that has changed. And I think even to other people to a certain extent has changed as well. So it's interesting that the end of life changes for someone else can actually quite significantly impact me.
Well, in what way, if you had to explain it, in what way has it changed how you see them? Is it more, less?
It's more general changes to my, I suppose, how I interact with people. So for example, I was never really impatient, but helping her out, I remember this one time where, it was kind of like, I read that basically you still want to try and give someone who's got Alzheimer's or something like that as much autonomy as possible. You don't want to coddle them. You don't want, like, they're still able to function and do things. And you never want to talk about them as if they're not in the room with you, that sort of deal, which it's tempting to do sometimes, and you stuff up and you do it, but you learn not to do that. And same with like the patience thing. You learn to go, okay, she's really struggling to put away the cutlery. She used to be able to do this all the time, and I'm seeing like the boundary points of her struggling and not being able to do it. Like, take a breath, Kyra, and relax. It's not her fault. It's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault. It just is. So it's more, and I suppose like a little bit of the outlook on life as well. Just being like, look, life can serve you up some shit, which isn't fair. I think she should have only been retired for a year or two, I think, something like that. It's kind of coming into the golden years. My dad, for example, says this is the best time in his life, this period right now. He worked really hard, got himself to a position where he can enjoy, do whatever he wants, even though body-wise it's not as spry as he used to be. That's like a sad thing, and it's something that you just have to accept. It's just like,
and it differs as well when we're talking about end of life or the finiteness of life or the mortality in the sense of a couple of things. One, I mean, obviously you mentioned Alzheimer's, but that particular thing about, getting the other individual to have as much action or energy to affect the world or do what they need to do, that kind of just applies broadly to almost any disability. So when you have like a support care company or something like that, you go towards a path of, okay, well, let them do as much as they can physically and mentally can do versus kind of taking it away from them. When you go through all the studies and whatnot, like the studies and the training that they make you do, they very much promote that in terms of, hey, that's where you're going to try and lean towards.
For sure.
I think also the finiteness changes, the finite view of life also changes depending on, like, have you ever heard the terminology where it's like, someone dies when they're 50 or in the 50s, you go, taken too young.
Yeah.
But then when it's in 60s, it's like, oh, okay, that's a little bit young. 70s, okay, it kind of makes sense. Yeah. 80, had a good run. 90, like, well, a life well lived. And so does the finite essence of life change because you've lived longer? Like, does that have an actual impact on it? Is the end of life of a 4-year-old the same sort of, and it isn't when you look at it very objectively, it isn't, but when you think about it very rationally, let's just say a 4-year-old's end of life to a 72-year-old's end of life, okay, you probably want the similar things, perhaps mobility, the agency to do whatever things they want, to not have pain and everything else associated. So a lot of the things are broad, like you kind of expect them across the whole sense of it. I go, something about the spectrum of how long you've potentially lived, I think also plays a part in how you might conceptualize end of life, because it is very different to think, let's just say if you were a very, very deep thinking 15-year-old, if you go, hey, if I died at 30, what is it going to mean? What's my end of life going to look like? I feel like that would be probably an even harder conceptualization, thought process than saying, what will I look like if end of life is 90? And that becomes a little bit more, okay, well, I'll be happy. It's fine. I've got all this time to be able to do all these things. But then if it's such a short, compressed time, then I guess the agency, the speed that you have to do things, the accomplishments that, we probably associate with a lifetime can't be done anymore. So it becomes more problematic. So I think it can differ depending on the range that you look as well.
The book that I read not too long ago, Bitter Orange Tree, one of the quotes I read out from it was similarly along these lines, where this girl's grandmother dies, Suhor, and she gets these kind of condolences from the rest, friends, family, well-wishers, and they're sort of along the similar line, she was so long, she lived a good long life, she was able to do all of these things, and she's kind of getting this sympathy and sympathy for her mother, her grandmother, who she kind of viewed as a mother, and she was kind of lamenting, I guess, like, but she got taken away. It's not really to do with the age; it's to do with this person who I know and who I loved, and who, honestly, a similar sort of story to me, which was there was things that she wished she could have asked, and she wished she could have known about and done, and so this was where I think that the time, I mean, certainly a factor, a 4-year-old dying is a tragedy, kind of no matter the circumstance. An 80-year-old, you can have that, but it's still, I think, like a personal thing. It's probably best viewed as it's a tragedy, but it's more of an expected tragedy, whereas the 4-year-old's an unexpected one.
In terms of, just quickly on this one, end of life, I guess, thought processing, and I know you've done some of this before in the past, but I mean, I want to just check that whether you have you done any like thought process or activities or steps where you where you wake up and you'll do like the worst case scenario type of deal? And I think Sam Harris kind of is a proponent of this, and a few other people, in terms of the meditation, where you go, okay, imagine the absolute worst thing that could happen, which could be all your family dying. So I mean, it's kind of verging in that, like, what happens if there was end of life that very day? And then obviously realizing that perhaps it's not that, and then you have been happier.
Try and enjoy the day.
Have you done beyond something like that, have you done something else where you kind of play an activity in your mind that simulates a bit of end of life, whether it's just your own or other people's?
Honestly, not so much, man, because I have done that, which in the Stoic world is negative visualization. That's what it's called. Right. And it comes from kind of Stoic philosophy. I was chatting with my roommate last night, and she mentioned she actually did, I think it was sport physio or something, where basically and it was only for a semester at uni, but she went and saw cadavers on a table, and it was part of the, this is where the muscles are connected, this is this sort of thing. I've never actually really done anything like that, which is confront death full on, because I was just thinking as she was talking to me, I went, whoa, that would be a intense experience, which I'm not sure I'd really want to enjoy or partake in. I don't think I don't. We've talked about this Mexico thing. We saw someone who'd been shot in Mexico, and it's like it's been blanked from my mind. And Juan and my friend Joey said we were right there looking at it, but I honestly cannot recall, which makes me somewhat think that perhaps I block out things like that, which are really confronting. Who knows? But no, I haven't actually gone to that extent of going to funeral homes, going to people who have passed away, or putting myself in situations where it's like that real confronting of death or the real end of life, as in this person's only got a couple of days left to live, sort of deal.
Okay.
The one chance I kind of had for that, it wasn't even a chance. It was I was in Colombia, and I kind of missed my grandmother's funeral, so it wasn't actually, I didn't actually have the chance to say goodbye. I could have if I really wanted to, but it was I didn't really know her that much well, so
no, fair.
Yeah.
No, well, because I was going to say 2 points. I mean, at one time or another, most people are going to go to a funeral or a cremation or something like that.
And I have been to those,
and that's an aspect. Obviously, that's not something that you choose to do. That's just kind of by default, life will give you that, and that's what you go and do.
Yep.
But I know that I myself have run, and it's never been, how would I explain it? It's never been like a conscious decision that I'm going to go, hey, today I'm going to run this activity in my mind. It's more, I don't know, just randomly a thought process will come into my mind in terms of, imagine if this would happen. But I know at least I've done this, I'll say 20 or 30 times in the last few years, where I'll imagine, someone really close to me passing away, and then thinking through what the eulogy would be or how I would remember and stuff like that. And I know I don't do it, I don't think, to get like the eulogy right, or how I would say that, nor do I do it for the purpose of, how would I be able to recognize them or say the good things about them. But I think if I was trying to like rack my brains, I would say it's more so that I am prepared for when that end of life stage happens. I'm already prepared to, okay, I've imagined how that would look like. I'm ready for that. I'm ready to just recognize the good about it, move on type of deal. Yeah. Which, I mean, so, we're talking about humans right now, right? But we had this just recently with our dog. So in terms of the expectation, I think it was on Monday. Yeah, Monday just going by. We were fully expected. I left home. I was like, yep, I'm not seeing this dog ever again. This dog's going to get put down. That's it. I'm going to come home. There's no dog.
Okay.
That didn't happen. There's still a dog, which is good. Other issues are abound, however. But there was one of those, I'm in the stage right now there that I'm like, cool, I can see the end of life for an animal. Yeah. Obviously, it's different to a human, but it's very close. And so you go, yep, I'm prepared. I've already probably prepared myself for that eventuality, for the ensuing mess that happens around it, for the remembrance of it as well. So I think that there can be some preparation, not only just for yourself, but I think for others that are going to happen, in putting yourself into the, okay, what's the worst that could happen? What are some of the possibilities around that? How can you get yourself into the position where you're going to start looking at it in the best positive light? Whenever people do say, though, the whole everything that happens, you can turn around, you can make it a positive, spin and all sorts of stuff. So if someone, your best friend dies, you can put it into a good spin. I get it. Maybe I can see some people being proponents of that. I kind of go man, humans are emotional creatures. You're going to fucking hate it. There's going to be shit to it. Yeah. Don't try and, sweeten it for whatever reason. But I think it's also a part that you also have to recognize that that's going to happen anyways. It's going to suck. You're going to be sad about it. But if you weren't, there's probably something that'd be even more wrong about that.
Yeah, it's a very extreme way of thinking, which could come useful sometimes. But I think for the vast majority of people is probably not the optimal approach
Yeah, look,
to take.
do you need to do it probably sometimes? Yeah. What if you're in the middle of war, right? Best friend dies next to you. Probably not the right time to start, crying over him and then you die. No, you fucking just keep on going.
You try and make some sense out of, it's just touching upon all the books I've been reading recently. So like the Diving Bell and the Butterfly, it's about a guy who had locked-in syndrome, Jean Dominique Bowlby, and
locked in syndrome.
So basically where you're so paralyzed, not even from the neck, and head up, it's everything is paralyzed apart from maybe an eye, so you can maybe blink.
So like they blink to communicate. And
yes, which is what he did. And he was describing, you can have these butterfly moments of, I'm imagining myself eating a steak. It's the best steak that's ever existed. I can do this. I can experience these sights and these things. And then on the other hand, it's just an awful like position to be in. He describes this one moment which was just sound like pure torture. Urine. This catheter came loose, so he could smell the urine on him. Obviously, can't do anything about it. This machine's beeping. Nurse comes in, flicks on the TV onto like some bullshit channel. Like he's trying to communicate with her, but she doesn't see him blinking. And it's just truly horrible. And there's no way. That's one of those ones where it's like, how can you try and spin this as a positive? He can't. His son's there trying to communicate with his son, and he can't, and it's really awful. And then the trauma book I'm reading at the moment is very much about people who they try and make sense of awful things happening to them, usually while they're young, but even adults going to war. You mentioned a couple of things like that, or getting into car crashes and just seeing people dying, burning in front of you, unable to escape from their cars. And it's very much, you just got to come up with some sort of mental strategy to cope with that. But those are usually for more the extreme cases. But I guess you could also do that with an end of life thing. I think my general philosophy of life already somewhat prepared me for my mum's passing away, or which will happen sooner rather than later, and her deterioration. And honestly, like my dad is also, I kind of got it from him, the outlook on life, and he's kind of already made peace with it. My brother's probably sort of similar as well. So I think you can have a mental framework which can make the end of life, maybe, I don't know if you'd describe it as easier, or it makes more sense, or it's a way of blocking it out, or just surviving in the moment. Thankfully my life's pretty calm and chill. True. This is easily the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And it's not even happened to me, it's happened to my mum. So it is, kind of like that, that sort of mental framework, I guess.
Okay. There's got a couple of comments here from Patricia.
Okay.
In the YouTube as well. She says you were never prepared. And even though when the person is sick and you know that they're going to die very soon, you're also never prepared, which I guess is true as well. There's only so much that you can prepare for any type of end of life sort of position. Sure, you might think you are. Obviously, what we're saying is, you're going to feel something anyway, and be prepared to feel something as you go through it. That's just humanity, right?
Something new. I've never had anyone really close to me pass away. It's always been very distant. There's been a distance between me and
before the connectivity. Let's just put a little pause here.
Yeah, sounds good.
Let's just bring the mood up quickly with a little bit of boost. Now, it is bringing up the mood up quite a bit because we have quite a few boosts that came through. And people even listened to what I called out in the last musings when I said that we'd hit 4 years. And we had a couple of people boost through in relation to that too, which is very good. So I'm going to pick us up. I think this might be
from the 13th.
Yes, 13th. Yes, correct. And we got one on the 14th here. We got one from Dave Jones, the dependable Dave Jones, 12,112 sat cent using Cron. That's the weekly boost for the Me and Moreline Nation.
Thank you, Dave.
Dave, thank you so much for that. Really appreciated. We've got one from the Tone Wrecker. Now he sends 12,345 sat cent using Fountain, and he says, "Great discussion. These things take time to see what happens with all the experimentation occurring. V4V music will likely splinter into dozens of directions because it is small and nimble and not constrained by being safe and predictable middle-of-the-road platforms for general public. I think that's a good thing. Many of us curious explorers were on the internet when it was a chore to reach. That's very true. Then eventually the public started noticing, hey, what's going on over there? That's a very good point.
I always like these references to the internet because once again, I think I mentioned this to you, but I wish I'd been 5-10 years earlier born just to experience this internet thing that's coming out.
To be a little bit older to see what's going on in here.
Just a bit. Yeah. And maybe to experience the disco era. That sounded like a pretty cool era.
Like a good time.
But yeah, thank you very much, Tone Wrecker. That's, V for V Music. I'm going to reach out to Adam shortly and see if I can get him on just to talk about differences between what's going on now and someone actually called him he was a DJ, then he was a VJ, which is like video jockey, and now he's a V for VJ.
V for VJ. There you go.
I like that.
That would be good if you can get Adam back on, but thank you very much. Yes, the Tone Wrecker. We've got Macintosh, and he sends, wow, 4 years. How awesome. Now I feel like a newbie. 44,444 sats sent using Fountain.
Oh, wow. Baller.
Macintosh, thank you very much for that. That is, and I called that. I was like, if you want to send 44444, for 4 years, and he did that. Boom. Thank you very much, so much, Macintosh. And then we got Cole McCormick. This episode was fantastic. I've been working out with the steel mace for a few years now. Still learning tons. The philosophy is to be uncomfortable with leveraged weight. So any movement with 10 kg feels heavier because of unbalanced moving weight, and you have to control it. Learning more flows with it. That's 5,492 sats sent using Fountain. I'm assuming that's off our me and drinks.
I didn't even know you exercise that much. I haven't really heard him talk about it. So
there you go. It's the people you don't know that maybe exercise the most.
Yeah, so that was Cole from America Plus, as I mentioned right at the start, and Macintosh from Generation Bitcoin. So if you want to check out those shows, I would recommend, because I certainly do a lot.
And that's all the boosts.
Yeah, much appreciated, everyone. I checked out the PayPal then. Still no PayPal come in. So if you want to be the first, you can do it. You don't get a shirt, but you get like my undying love. So, which is more worth a shirt or Kyron's undying love?
Yeah. You probably want the shirt, to be fair.
Yeah.
No, I do appreciate it. Thank you very much, folks. That obviously keeps us. It's the value that very much directly supports us keeping on giving value back to everyone as well.
Correct. Yes. And for those who are wondering, if you want to partake in this, go to mereimmortalspodcast.com/support, and there's a little bit of an explainer there on how you can do that.
Absolutely.
Yep. So
now there's a few other places I think we can jump into.
Yeah.
Have you got a good?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the time aspect of it. So. There's a thing called high versus low time preference. Do you know what this is? Okay. So it's mostly an economics term. High time preference means you discount the future. So you can see in spreadsheets and financial reports, if people are expecting an income, so say you've got a project, a mining thing, and you only get paid once the contract is finished, and that's in 2 years' time, you kind of discount that potential revenue because you actually don't have it now. It's in 2 years' time. In mining, I think you used to apply like a 10% discount. So it would be, if something's worth in 10 years' time, it would be worth 90% if it was due a year later, and then 81% if it was due 2 years' time. So it's kind of this aspect. Would you rather have $10 now or $15 later? I guess.
Okay.
And I was just thinking, what if you could use this in relation to thinking about things like relationships, health, status at the end of your life? Is it worth putting much value on those things when it is potentially 50 years in the future for us, being early 30s, so that's roughly mortality when you'd expect average life expectancy for us. Is it worth putting them as high as something that could be in 3 years' time?
I guess, hold on. Said another way, saying, are they like, do I think they're going to be as valuable in 50 years' time as they're going to be in 3 years' time?
Just for you, yeah, I guess. So if I could say, one, I can guarantee you're going to have, a really healthy functioning body now, in 2 years' time, or a really healthy functioning one in 50 years' time, and I can guarantee one of those outcomes. So which of those would you prefer? Which would you choose? Which do you value higher? Yeah. The functioning body in 2 years' time, or the functioning body in 50 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, I think by default, I don't know what your answer is, but I think by default most humans would probably choose the shorter time frame than the longer time frame, just because it's the quicker maybe certainty, the quicker resolution, the quicker accomplishment.
Yeah, and that's called high. You have a high time preference, so you prefer things which are closer, and you give more value to them because of their closeness.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep.
And so I was for example, I've always been iffy about the whole carpe diem thing.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Seize the day. When you look at two individuals with high time preference, so this is say like a young person and even an old person, and they both value the sooner, the nearer things that are closer more. Why don't they act the same, for example? Why aren't they focused on the same things, which you'd assume be things that give them pleasure? So drugs and sex is probably like the most immediate gratification type deals you can get.
Yep.
Whereas if you think of someone who's older, you'd usually be thinking, what do they value more? It's more quality time with loved ones. So I guess this goes to show, well, what happens there? Is it the time preference thing is actually changed, and that people who are older actually don't value, taking morphine and and meth and sex and things like that, even though they certainly could get it. It's if you're wealthy enough, you can pay for all of those sort of things. Or is it that you're just what you value in life just changes so much between being a 21-year-old and an 81-year-old that the time preference isn't even really a thing coming into that?
I mean, there are differences that I can think of in terms of, this doesn't answer for every single possibility and, permutation, but there is an aspect of pleasure hedonically, whether it's, well, not on your lonesome, as in, when you're young and you're doing stuff with other people, whether it's drugs or sex or partying or whatnot. Often it's not just you on your own, it's with other people. And when you're older, like I'm assuming an 80-year-old is not just this massive crew of 80-year-olds roaming around, partying and clubbing, right? So I think there's a differentiation of what the culture, just generally the system that you interact with, like the people around your general age. If everyone determines that, hey, this is the really fun thing to do, which at that point, maybe it's, going to bingo or playing golf, or, hey, in 50 years' time, I don't know what it'll be for 80-year-olds of that time era. But there's a generalness to what people determine is like fun, or this is the thing you should be doing, like the it thing.
You don't really see 80-year-olds in the gym, for example.
Yeah, and if you do, it's very rare, and maybe they don't find it as enjoyable, although I definitely have seen a handful who really enjoy it. So, but it's not the norm. Maybe in 50 years, it will be the norm. So maybe that's one lens of looking at it. So I would say that, yes, the two of them can have, the high time?
So high time preference.
So both of them are going to have that high time preference of closeness, but what they're optimizing for is probably going to be very different between those year groups as well. And which I think gets also to a point of looking towards that end of life experience and thinking it through at the age that you are now, because it is such a varied time difference between, well, it could be 20 years, it could be 50 years, it could be 70 years. You don't truly know what in 50 years you might value as your highest value. You can have some inkling, and there's one aspect of a lot of things I've listened to where there'll be doctors or people go on interview, those people who are at the very end of life. They're about to die. They've got a couple of days left, and they'll ask them, what are the things that you regret? What are the things that you've wished? What do you value most now? And it's always like, people, I regret that I worked too much, that I didn't see my family. So there's really broad like rocks, which you can kind of get, you can kind of go, hey, end of life, I think I would have, you put that mental calculation. Will I care about the fact that I stayed at work tonight 2 more hours to get this project done, or that I was there for when my daughter walked, right? Yeah. Of course, you're going to be like, okay, if I really objectively look at this, that's probably the thing that I'm going to remember down that track. But the big rocks, those big rocks, okay, that makes sense. But when it gets to like that really finesse level of, could I truly say that in 70 years' time, I'm going to be optimizing for working out and really finding joy in listening to podcasts about this particular things? It's kind of like, it's too far. I don't almost just can't predict whether that's going to be really something to start optimizing for now.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, when I think about it, I go, it's pretty much that same thing. There's unpredictability in what I will value, and so and just literally where I'm going to be. Like I said, with my mum's illness, it's one of those like long-term things. I look back and I go, oh, I think I made these decisions because it roughly, because of what was going to happen or what was happening at that time. And it certainly wasn't front of mind when I was making the decision. So you can make decisions and you can only kind of make sense of them later. I think that's a pretty common occurrence.
Sure.
But when I go, in general, having a low time preference is good. Essentially delayed gratification. I do want the $15 later, if I can delay, instead of $10 now. That's a good trade-off to make. And the marshmallow test, all that sort of stuff, it generally shows as a good thing. But when I think for myself, I go, is there anything that I'm doing now which will really help me for when I'm 70? If you told me, Karen, you're doing a lot of handstands, it's really damaging your wrists. It's going to actually make your wrists really brittle and not great when you're 70 years old. I would maybe take that into account for 5%, but 95% is still, that's me at 70. Like, I'm just going to keep doing this at the moment. And so there's very little physical and I would even say mental or skill-based things that I'm actively working on now for the knowledge, yes, this is really going to help me. Some things are incidental. So I really like language learning. What's one of the best things to prevent Alzheimer's or to stop the deterioration, or I think it's kind of preventative as well. Learning a second language is huge. It's one of the biggest factors, and health, obviously. Is that something that I take into account? Yeah, kind of, but I wouldn't be learning Spanish or German just for that reason.
For that reason,
That's way...
It's supplementary, but it's not for just that reason.
Exactly. So, yeah, when I think... I don't know, how about you? Obviously, with the physical things, you mentioned Peter Attia. How about any mental stuff that you... Is there anything that you mentally go, okay, this will really serve me when I'm 70 years old or 80 years old, that you're doing now to cultivate?
Nah, not really. Like, honestly, not beyond the scope of a few years do I really go down the track to think to myself, hey, at the end of life, I really want to have this type of maybe anti-fragility to my mind, or this sort of wisdom, or this conceptualization. For this, I think the same reason that I can't really, the more I've seen from, my goal setting, whether it's monthly or annual goals, I go, if I look back at my annual goals from 3 years ago, man, they're really very different to what they are today. And of course, life changes, things change. And if I go, man, if I'm really going to extrapolate 30 years and get more precise, it's not going to work. It is a fool's errand for me to try to predict it to that level of accuracy. There is aspects of, yes, if you don't plan, well, you're planning to fail. But I would say I've got some guardrails at a very broad level of, I guess, mentally, physically, and from a soul perspective, I want to be kind of bouncing around. What that looks like in there, I'm not sure. And so I think it's one of those where, unless I was presented with such a case where it's, okay, here's your finiteness of light, if we move now to the next 10 years, okay, well, it speeds up then that mentality and what I start optimizing for. But for now, it's you hear that, well, you should be living your life like it's, your last day on earth, or today's going to be the last day. Yeah, life to the fullest.
Carpe diem. Yeah.
And one aspect of that I do kind of agree with, obviously not particularly on the day, but if I go, hey, in these annual goals that I do, it's reflective of this. If I go, hey, for this next year, these are my goals. And it's goals in the growth aspect, for sure. But it's also very much now, it's, hey, this is what brings me joy. This is what I really enjoy doing. And I go, hey, if I was to do this in a year beyond my normal day-to-day, and I accomplish these things, and then I died at the end of that year, I would be happy. I'd go, yes, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't go and change it and be like, oh, well, fuck, if I knew that, I'd go and travel to whatever else. Now, yes, I guess I can say that because I have traveled a lot. And so traveling now is not a huge priority for me. If there was something that all of a sudden I'm like, if I had something in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm going to have a massive regret. I think it comes to regrets. If there's something that you're going to have a huge regret that you didn't do and you're putting off for whatever reason, that's probably going to be an issue come finiteness or end of life.
Or a fear-based thing, which is what a lot of regret is, because why didn't you do the thing? Well, it's usually because you're scared or fearful
Sure,
of it,
yep.
which is what I think probably where the Carpe Diem, the Memento Mori sort of aspect comes into it, the YOLO, for the modern version, which is, if you're scared of it, that's where it's probably these things are helpful for it. But if it's, is this going to help me in 40 years time? Well, it's almost like the opposite of that, right? Because if you want to be healthier in 40 years time, you probably need to be doing things which aren't exactly seizing the day.
True. Yep.
Go to the gym and do a moderate workout. Don't go too hard. Don't ruin your joints. Just do a moderate workout. Build a little muscle. That's no one counts that as seizing the day.
No, you'd be like, oh, why didn't you go like hard? If you were there for an hour, you could do 3 hours, get really yeah.
Or the opposite. Fuck the gym. I'm gonna go party.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm going to do whatever. It's the highest dopamine hit, and I'm going to really enjoy it, and that's it. I'm going to do that every single day.
Correct. Yeah.
It's like, well, you got to have a balance.
Yeah. So it's good for the fear-based things. Here's another one. This was also, it's been in my notes for a while, and I was going to bring it up in meanderings, but it never really fit. But now it comes out perfectly. So I was doing some handstands, and I come down from a handstand, nothing spectacular. I think it was just endurance. And this older gentleman comes up to me and he goes, and this is literally what he said, because I remember writing this down straight afterwards.
Okay, yeah.
I saw you standing on your hands and you make an old man feel jealous.
Ooh, okay.
First of all, how the fuck do you respond to that? I had nothing. There was nothing that I could say. I could laugh and be, I thanks. I was doing. Is that a compliment to me? Is that a? I don't know what. I didn't know what to do with that. So that was just a funny little thing, but it really did get me thinking about age. And so being young, in this aspect, it was kind of the youngness factor. Oh, you can do this cool thing, and you're making this old man feel jealous because I can't do that. And it got me thinking, man, you know what? Being young really isn't all it's cut out to be. People talk about, the youth is wasted on the young, and I really don't think that's the case. Because when I look at my teenage years, for example, I never want to go back to them. That was not a fun period for me. My 20s, even now, I go, you know what? There was a lot of suffering caused in there as well, and even at that very moment when he said that a couple of months ago, I was, you heard it on the podcast, I was struggling with dating stuff. My mind was all over the shop. That wasn't a particularly pleasant time for me either. And so, sure, you can maybe have some physical aspects which are great, but I don't think that being young is actually all that it's cut out to be. I look at my dad, for example. He's the happiest he's ever been, is what he tells me, and the most content he's ever been.
Yeah.
And he's in his 60s. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that? Is end of life changes? Are they generally negative, and is it negative because you're old?
Nah, I don't think so. I'll probably say, well, just a challenge to, not a challenge, but I think let's just look at that logic really clearly in terms of, you've got you're saying you go through youth and you go through suffering, but then I very much believe that unless you go through suffering of some way, shape or form, then you've got no real sort of like either baseline or comparison point to then be able to be quote unquote happy or satisfied or dissatisfied, whichever it may be, to at least know what that is. And I'd kind of go, hey, he might have gone, hey, you're making an old man, jealous because of what you can do. And sure, obviously physically fitness can be done better from youth than it is. Although not all the case, you can have some oldies who can be doing the movements and whatnot.
Yeah, I just want to add to this. So as he said that, he had come away from his wife, I'm guessing, who he was on a stroll with, on a leisurely stroll, and then rejoined her. They held hands, walked off into the sunset.
Yep.
And obviously, with me looking for a partner, and that was the greatest
pain
point in my life. Yeah, exactly. It was a straight up this old dude is just fucking ramming it home. This is why it was such a confusing thing to happen to me, and how I didn't really know how to respond to that, because it had that aspect of it.
But
well.
In terms of the youth being wasted on the young, I kind of go, I feel like everyone has to go through some suffering to whatever varying degrees, so that when you get older, if you have the ability to get older, then you then cherish life even more because you understand and conceptualize how bad it can be or how much the suffering can be, to the point that, it's likely the old man could say, I'm jealous of you for doing this, with probably a really clear reason as to, hey, I either remember what it was like back in the day, or I know the difference between what is like and what is now. And so he, can really conceptualize that really, really well. I kind of go, I think, yes, youth is wasted in the young at a very superficial level. But I think if you didn't have a lot of the suffering and pain that you go through, that everyone goes through those stages, you would never recognize then a lot of the happiness that you can achieve later on, purely because it's a comparison level to what was back in the day. Even if some things like fitness and other things deteriorate anyways.
Yeah. I think there's more serious things, obviously. More illness, more death, more those two in particular, and passing away of friends and things like that. So obviously there's more serious in comparison to the child who got bit by a bug, or their parents are having fights, or they might be getting a divorce. So it's in the objective sense, that way you'd go, okay, yeah, you're right. Older people do have it worse. But as you mentioned, when you're young, you have to go through that suffering. And so experiencing that for the first time of, oh shit, my parents are getting divorced and it's my fault, or thinking that's an amount of suffering. And I would love to see a cortisol chart over time of lifetime, how much stress was actually hitting the brain, the stress hormones or whatever was hitting at the brain at certain times. And just being seeing like, okay, well, no, you know what? Childhood maybe isn't as low down on the actual just pure physical pain or pure physical stress that's happening on the body. There's probably some studies or something like that out there. So that'd be interesting. But I was going, me and my brother experienced the same thing. We both were in the same room when we all kind of got the official confirmation that mum was officially diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he was in his late teens, I was in my mid-20s. I'd just been through 6 more years of life. I'd had 6 more years of relationships, pain, heartache, suffering, all that sort of thing. And I get the feeling that maybe I'm more mentally suited for that same experience that we had. And so this is where I go, you know what? Being older in that certain sense was probably a blessing, because it probably was rougher on him than it was on me. Sure. I don't know for sure. There's just, random thoughts. So
yeah, but I mean, I can see that. I can see you can make the point of, something equivalent happens when, you're 50 and you could very quickly start moving it towards, hey, well, shit, I've experienced 30 years of joy and the happiness. You also, by that point, either have experienced more things in life where, it builds up that anti-fragility of, okay, well, there's just another thing, and you know how to handle it better than you would when, you're much younger, because it just hasn't happened as much. This is not a end-of-life piece, but from a work perspective and otherwise, sometimes I can see the people who, have become really good at that, being anti-fragile or being able to deal with really challenging times in work or whatever it may be in a really good way, to, over time, obviously it's just been, it's happened, who knows, 100 times a year, and they've been working for 20 years. So then the next thing comes up and everyone's losing their marbles. This person's just like absolutely chilled out, cool about it. And it's a similar thing I would say across the board in terms of, hey, if someone, when you're 50 or 60 and someone's about to die, or your pet's about to die, or something, it's end of life, you probably have enough experiences that have happened to you now where you go, yeah, okay, I can handle this in a much more appropriate way than if it was like a 12-year-old that you were telling that, that parents were dying and they just wouldn't be able to, position themselves in a comparison to how bad suffering can get, etc.
That is straight up almost a life-ending position. My parents are dying. I don't know about you, but I couldn't see myself when I was 12, I couldn't imagine me at 20. That would be the difference. Exactly the same difference between probably me now and viewing myself at 85.
Yeah, versus 12
it's
to
just
20.
so far away, and you have no context to put it into. So that case, like parents are dying or have died. Poof. Yeah, that's a huge thing. Do you have any other notes, or should I get into the summary? I mean, you have a lot of notes.
Yeah, I think we can go into the summary.
Okay, so for me, it was if you're lucky. Funnily enough, if you're lucky, you'll get to experience these horrible things at the end of your life because you made it there. Because a lot of people don't. A lot of people get, just awful diagnoses, the hot luck of life, car crashes. If not that, it could be a cancer. If it's not that, once again, I know, friends, very close loved one, relationship partner got cancer at the age of like 27. It's just like the stage 4 as well. It's just like, what the fuck, man? It's like 27-year-old. This is bullshit. So long life is not guaranteed, and if you do make it to the end, you're going to experience so much just suffering, heartache, changes along the way. Some good. We talked about end of life changes. We focus mostly on the negative just because of the topic of how it came up, but there's lots of positive things as well. I'm sure my dad, if I had him on, could talk about all the positive ones. But yeah, I was just going, for me, time-wise, preparation for the end of life changes, I don't look much beyond 5 to 10 years in terms of things that will help or hinder me that far into the future. But I don't particularly see the point. So low type preference as a default is pretty good. Saving money, delaying gratification, that's really good stuff and actually can pay off in that 5 to 10 year time frame. So it makes sense to do that. But life is also short and unfair. So trying not to take it too far with that, I suppose, is my little summary there.
Yeah, I like it. I think, so I'll wrap up a couple of the notes that I had in mind just into the one. I think one of the biggest things that, I'm attributing this to Lex Friedman, but I don't know if Lex actually pulled this from somewhere else, so where this quote is from or this particular line. But he said, death is not a bug, it's a feature of life. And I think ever since I saw that, I've seen it in various other formats in a few different places. And it's very much, I guess, if I was going to encapsulate what I guess I think about from like an end of life or mortality, let's combine them. I kind of go, like, it's not unique. It happens to everybody. This happens all the time. At the same time, at the moment, I got a book that Tim Ferriss either recommended. He's recommended it, but he's also talked about it with other people. It's Japanese death poems. Have you heard about this?
Yeah.
Yep. So I've got that to sort of like read a little bit at nighttime. Now it sounds like
in Japanese.
Jesus, it's not. It is in Japanese. It's half Japanese, half English. Okay. So it's got both translations, which is kind of cool. But reading some of those, which is essentially, I've only just started it, but it's poems of either famous poets or sensei masters or something like that, or sensei's teachers. But
haikus mostly.
No, some of them. The last third is haikus, and I think the first 2/3 are not haikus. Okay. They might be in haiku form, but they're not explicitly all haikus. Yeah. And so some of them I've read, like a few little bits, and you can obviously see the differences. But what really stuck out to me is like, holy shit, obviously you see it's like name dead, obviously all dead, and all these death. And you go, all these people, here they are writing at the very end of life. Some of them are saying poetic things. Some of them saying some interesting stuff or regret or what they don't want it to do. And I kind of go back to that Lex Friedman quote of, it isn't a bug. Like, it isn't like, oh my God, it's, hey, this is going to happen. No matter what you think about it, at some way, shape or form, like, you won't exist anymore. And there's going to come a time when you're going to be in your end of decade or end of week or end of month. It's quite likely you won't know it. Sometimes you do know it, and I don't know if that's a better thing or worse thing. But an aspect of it for me, almost in freeing it, is, hey, recognizing that is going to happen eventually, and being as much as you can, although Mum called it out very well, you can't be fully prepared, but recognizing that it isn't a fault of anyone. It is just the eventuality of life.
Yeah, for sure. No, nice sum up, man. Before we just do the last little value for value pitch, I did just want to put out here, so potentially in the future there might be some podcast gaps. Luckily, my travel plans and life situation are very adaptable. So just depends how mum is going, and that's intentional on my part as well. I built my life to be adaptable, somewhat related to this. It was there's just if a gap comes up or something, we'll talk about it obviously, but I know myself personally, things could just come up in any given time, and probably mum is going to start needing more care, and me and my brother want to help out my dad as much as possible, so that might happen. I never really talked about this before because I didn't feel it was my place to talk about it. It's one of those ones where I could never get her consent because she was already diagnosed, and I suppose I could have right at the start of the podcast, but it never felt like it was appropriate to talk about. Now, because it is impacting my life a lot, it's
worth calling out as a reason.
Definitely. Me, for example, I
just in case people think that Karen's getting lazy.
I mean, there's probably part of that as well. That's got to play a part. I'll mention it now and then, but it's not a whole lot, to be honest. I don't want to focus on the on this particular topic. Once again, it's not particularly my place to bring it up. And as for me, if you're just wondering, I'm fine. Like I said, there's been something I've been preparing for a long time. I get sad sometimes, get all those sorts of things, but in terms of as a whole, I'm still going pretty good. So
but again, as we called out, right, it is mere mortals. We're all humans. If you don't get that, there is an issue. There's probably a more underlying issue if you're not getting those sort of feelings.
Yeah,
and I think
it's correct.
It's worth recognizing as well. If someone's listening to this and you're thinking like, oh shit, you're going through it as well with it, like an end of life feeling, whether it's especially if you're young. Honestly, I would say trying to connect it with like really old, and this is what I would say. It's like wiser people. It doesn't necessarily have to be like older people, but people who have gone through those experiences either multiple times or have seen them all. Man, that's why you often see, depending on the country, you might have a country where like shit is real bad, where it's Iraq or something else, where people are dying, and you've got family, like you got young kids who've seen death at a very young age and whatnot. They feel like wise adults by the time they're teenagers, purely because they've experienced all these things. And probably, honestly, if we were to have conversations with people like that, they'll probably see end of life in a very different way because they're already, like technically many years down the track for the experiences versus what we would have up to this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why Viktor Frankl's your favorite book, Man's Search for Meaning, is so powerful. He had some truly horrific things happen to him, his family, his friends, and he also had the mental framework of how to deal and adjust with that, which makes that such a powerful book. I'm reading a book by Primo, I don't know how to say his name, Primo Levi, and he was, I think, a German Jew, similar sort of circumstances in the concentration camps. Basically, everyone he knows dies, he survives, that sort of deal. Reading one of his books at the moment, and it's a war book, so it's just it's heavy, really, really heavy. People, it's good to, I suppose, seek them out and learn from them if you can, so that you can also prepare. And fingers crossed, Viktor Frankl's life is likely going to be, no matter what happens to me, much harder than mine. And
well, I mean, I enjoy reading this book sometimes, and I know some people go like, "Oh, why do you like watching those movies, listening to these things?" I think one aspect that I do enjoy it. Yes, it has a lot of meaning and wisdom beyond what we would ever experience in the suffering that we do in day-to-day life, but also there's a lot of perspective in the sense that you can have some perspective of like, okay, shit, I am going through some difficult stuff, but it can get much worse. Like suffering can go much deeper than what's existing here.
There's always another level to it.
Yeah, and then actually listened to a thing just recently from Jordan Peterson, which kind of reminded me because it was something that I heard ages ago, which was there's also a recognition sometimes that there's actually way worse things than death. So if end of life comes and the priority or the piece that you're really worried about is the death bit, there can be worse things than death, right? It can be things that actually take apart, as Jordan calls it, character or your soul. And if that went away and you're still alive, well, that's probably even worse than actually being dead. So, you can also play around with those ideas and being like, well, You know, if at the end of your life you've lost, you know, your character and your ethics and your morality, and you know you're seen in this horrific way, shit, at that point you're probably welcoming death.
Yeah.
So
yeah, correct. That's a good place to end it off. The Value for Value podcast. We do all of this free up front. You can just, you know, we hope we get you get some value from this. How you can provide it back, sharing the podcast with someone who potentially would benefit from this. If you think they would know, you know, if they're having some troubles, changes through their lives that you think they might connect, that'd be good. Talent-wise, you can send us through, you know, we mentioned a couple of people just then, Viktor Frankl's books, you know, war books, Jordan Peterson. All of these people have what we would consider some wisdom with regards to these end-of-life changes. If you know any other great resources for that, please reach out and tell us. That would be very interesting and potentially helpful to know. And then finally, you can help support the show monetarily. Value is just, you know, whatever value you get from this, just return it however much you want. We were suggesting last week with the fours, but you know, it's up to you. It's up to you to send in what you feel that you valued this show as, and meremortalspodcast.com/support and is the way to go to learn more, and just using a new podcasting app, one like Fountain, Podverse, Castamatic are good ones to try out.
Beauty. Good. We're going to leave it there, folks. Thank you very much for tuning in. Remember, you can tune in to the music session at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on the Wednesdays. For now, thank you very much for the folks who tuned on live. And for everyone else, please enjoy yourself wherever you are. Me and Mortalites 1 out.
Karen out. Bye.
Thank you. Good.
Good. All right. Turning that off there. It's still pretty loud. Why it's so loud? Thank you, Patricia, for joining us. Yeah. It's a rough topic. I'm going to end the stream here. Thanks, everyone, and